My dudes, when Hell Let Loose Vietnam comes out in 2026, the North Vietnamese army could field one of the most diverse arsenals in the game. An eclectic mix of French leftovers from the Indochina War, Soviet and Chinese imports, and even unique Vietnamese adaptations. In this video, I will explore the weapons you might see in the game for the regular North Vietnamese army. These will include small arms, anti-tank, anti-air and improvised weapons, as well as some potential deployable heavy weapons which the NVA used throughout the conflict. After the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the NVA inherited thousands of French arms captured from that battle and the eventual French colonial departure from Indochina. So what kind of things could we get? The MAS 36 bolt-action rifle, adopted by the French in 1936, could serve as the primary weapon for the entry-level rifleman loadout. The more modern, semi-automatic MAS 49, produced from 1949, was also used by the French in Indochina. It was the standard French rifle during the Indochina War, so there were plenty captured by Vietnamese forces. The French FM-2429 light machine gun, adopted all the way back in 1925, could be a starting loadout for the machine gunner role, with more modern Soviet or Chinese MGs being available for later loadouts to unlock as you level up the MG role for the NVA. The MAT 49, a French 9mm submachine gun which ended service in 1949, would be a perfect fit for the NVA assault role. It had a high rate of fire, great for close quarters fighting in the jungle. Some of those captured MAT 49s were later rechambered for the 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev round. These French weapons would give starter loadouts a unique flavour, contrasting with the more advanced Soviet and Chinese weaponry which would replace those French leftovers from the mid-50s as the Vietnam War escalated by the mid-1960s. A lot of the French weaponry was being phased out at that time, but some of the older equipment was still around, and the NVA was super resourceful, using anything they could get their hands on, so I would expect to see a couple of French weapons making their way into their weapon list. The Soviet Union heavily armed the NVA from the mid-1950s, and these weapons and vehicles form the bulk of the military aid received by the North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War. No doubt this Soviet weaponry will define much of the gameplay in Hell Let Loose Vietnam for the NVA. These will include some World War II era weapons like the PPSH-41, in use in Vietnam since the early 1950s. It could come with the stick or drum mags. There are also variants of the bolt-action Mosin-Nagant rifle, which the Soviet Union exported in large numbers to its allies like North Vietnam from its own stockpiles. More modern Soviet weapons provided to the NVA include the semi-automatic 10-round SKS carbine, introduced to the NVA from about 1955. It could be a loadout option for the riflemen or non-frontline troops like medics or engineers. Next, we have the iconic AK-47, appearing in NVA hands from around 1960. This bad boy would shine in the assault class, offering a lot of firepower and 30 rounds per magazine. By the mid-1960s, the stamped metal AKM, a lighter and more modern replacement for the milled AK-47, was being imported from the Soviet Union into Vietnam. This could be a default NVA assault rifle in the late war maps, or a high-level loadout to unlock for classes like the assault or squad leader. Maybe it could even have better ADS handling but higher recoil compared to the heavier AK-47. Turning to the machine guns, the RPD light machine gun entered Soviet service in 1944 and by the mid-1950s was in use by the NVA. It would make a strong choice for the assault or machine gunner loadout. It packed plenty of firepower with its 100-round drum magazine. The Soviet RPK light machine gun, produced from 1961, could be a good mid or high-level loadout for the machine gunner role. It functioned identically to the AKM but had a thicker and heavier barrel to allow for more sustained fire. It came with 30 or 40 round mags as well as a 75 round drum mag. When it comes to anti-tank weaponry, the RPG-2 or B-40 as it was designated in the NVA service was first seen in Vietnam in 1957. It could be an early anti-tank loadout for the AT class, while the RPG-7, known as the B-41 by the NVA, first saw action in Vietnam in 1967. This could serve as a more powerful late war AT loadout. There were different warheads available for these, including the most common high explosive anti-tank rounds or heat rounds, which were great against armor or bunkers, but they also had less common high explosive rounds which were best used against soft targets. It would be neat if players could choose if they wanted to use anti-armor or anti-personnel warheads for these RPGs. These Soviet arms should provide the backbone of the NVA weapons in Hell Let Loose Vietnam, but there should also be some offerings from another ally of North Vietnam. China, as a close ally of the Communist North Vietnamese government, also supplied millions of weapons, many of them direct copies of Soviet designs. For example, we could get the Type 50 SMG. This was a Chinese copy of the PPSH-41. These entered Vietnam in the 1950s and were commonly issued. Assault, command, squad leaders would probably get some of these for their SMG loadouts. The Type 56 assault rifle was a licensed copy of the AK-47, and these were produced from 1956 in China. It could be another common rifle for the NVA forces, while the Type 56 carbine is a clone of the SKS. This could appear in the game for rear echelon troops bridging the gap between bolt-action rifles and automatics. The Type 67 general purpose machine gun was in use by the NVA from the late 1960s. This could be another machine gun loadout for the NVA on maps set on or after 1967. Functionally, many of the Chinese weapons that copied from the Soviets would behave in the same way as the originals, but it would be cool for an authenticity and historical accuracy point of view if the devs included some of these Chinese weapon models. And then there are the unique Vietnamese weapon modifications, the kind of flavour that would set the NVA apart in Hell Let Loose Vietnam. These should include the K50M, which was the locally modified Chinese Type 50 PPSH copy. This SMG was compact, fast-firing, perfect for tunnel fights and ambushes. The NVA also might get some captured US weapons, like the M1 carbine or M1 Garand, or even M16 rifles. These could appear as high-level unlockables, reflecting how the NVA used whatever they managed to capture in battle. A lot of arms used by the French in Indochina were actually of American origin, including Thompson SMGs, M1 Garands and BARs. It's also possible the NVA will get some of those in their loadouts, but the devs might save those for the South Vietnamese or Viet Cong forces if they're ever added to the game, as those kind of weapons were more common for those armies. I will cover some of those improvised weapons used like homemade bombs or booby traps and IEDs later in this video. I really hope the devs do include some of these Vietnamese adapted weapons like the K50M. It was one of the few firearms produced in Vietnam, and their inclusion would make the NVA faction feel more authentic. Next up, let's talk about sniper rifles. The NVAs used whatever they could get their hands on. That includes World War II era scoped Mosin Nagants from the Soviet Union. There were also limited numbers of scoped Kar-98s, which were obviously German rifles, brought over by the French after World War II. They even had a handful of British scoped Lee Enfield No. 4 rifles, but these were even rarer. The scoped Mosins were the most common bolt-action sniper rifles at their disposal, and in the semi-automatic department they used scoped SVT-40s as well as scoped SKSs from the Soviet Union. These weren't purpose-built sniper rifles, but NVA armourers were known to install scopes on these to give troops some extra accuracy, sort of filling the niche for a dedicated marksman within their units. A bit later in the war, by 67 and 68, the NVA began receiving the brand new semi-automatic Soviet Dragunov SVD rifles. These were proper sniper rifles and were mainly issued to elite NVA sniper teams. They became more common towards the end of the war and especially into the 1970s. This was the first purpose-designed sniper rifle in NVA service. So, I would expect the starter and mid loadouts for the NVA snipers to feature some of the older equipment, while the Dragunov would be a desirable high-level loadout to grind for the NVA sniper role. No discussion of the NVA arsenal would be complete without mentioning their booby traps and their use of grenades and mines. These weapons and non-conventional tactics were the great equalizer, cheap, effective and psychologically terrifying for the US and South Vietnamese forces. The NVA were masters of mines and traps, and they made good use of things like the Soviet PMN and its Chinese copy, the Type 58 anti-personnel mine, which were widely in use by the 1960s. Improvised explosives were also used. These were made from thousands of dud US bombs or artillery shells which failed to explode. There were also infamous uses of Pun-G stake traps, which featured hidden sharpened bamboo pits, sometimes coated with poison. They also used spiked maces hanging from trees which could release if US soldiers hit a tripwire, and there were also traps placed within NVA tunnels which were intended to maim or kill US soldiers who dared to enter. When it comes to grenades, again the NVA were heavily reliant on Soviet and Chinese imports of things like the Soviet F1 or RG-42 frag grenades or the Chinese Type 67 stick grenade. However, As I said, they also fashioned some of their own hand grenades from explosives taken from unexploded US ordnance, as well as producing their own Molotov cocktails. Speaking of fire, the NVA were known to use flamethrowers such as the Soviet LPO-50 or its Chinese copy the Type 74, but in reality these were used only in small numbers when they were attacking fortified positions rather than use in regular jungle combat. It will be interesting to see how Expression Games decide to implement traps and mines for the NVA forces. I suspect they will be much more common than they are in the original Hell Let Loose game. Currently, only engineers, recon team leaders and snipers get access to anti-personnel mines, and players can place a maximum of 6 anti-personnel mines or 4 anti-tank mines per person at a time. I reckon more classes will have access to mines or the ability to set traps for the NVA in Hell Let Loose Vietnam. In game, these could make those classes especially dangerous. Engineers may lay anti-tank and anti-personnel mines for area denial, while assault players could set up booby traps in tunnels or jungle trails. And the Punji pit could act as hidden traps that cause bleed-out damage, forcing US squads to rely on their medics. Together with the IEDs, the grenades, the mines and the booby traps, these could make US attempts in the game to assault or advance on positions quite dangerous. Literally every step in the jungle or into a village could be that US soldier's last step. One of the greatest challenges facing the North Vietnamese was the overwhelming air power of the United States, most notably their use of transport and attack helicopters. To counter this, the NVA fielded a wide variety of anti-aircraft weapons, many supplied by the Soviet Union and China. When it comes to anti-aircraft weaponry for the NVA and Hell Let Loose, there are a couple of options. Infantry squads could use the Soviet Dishka 12.7mm heavy machine gun. Invented back in 1938, it first appeared in Vietnam in the 1950s, and it served as their anti-aircraft workhorse. Its high rate of fire and heavy round made it deadly against helicopters like the UH-1 Huey. We know the US forces are getting the M2 Browning 50 cal machine gun, so maybe the Dishka could be a deployable heavy machine gun for the NVA. It's possible these will be deployed in a similar way that anti-tank guns are currently deployed in Hell Let Loose. Players will need supplies and someone with their deployable loadout to set that blueprint down before you can build a tripod-mounted Dishka. Moving up in caliber, the ZPU series of 14.5mm anti-aircraft guns introduced to the NVA in the early 1960s also provided devastating firepower against low-flying aircraft and even ground targets. There were a number of variants ranging from the single-barreled ZPU-1 up to the monster quad-mounted ZPU-4 version. These were sometimes deployed in static positions or on wheeled carriages which could be towed by vehicles and deployed on firing jacks within 20 seconds. A heavier anti-aircraft autocannon used by the NVA was the Soviet ZU-23-2. This was a towed 23mm twin autocannon which was in service since the early 60s. I imagine if it is available as a deployable AA gun for the NVA, it would cost more supplies to build than the Dishka, for example. So as you go up in size and caliber, these AA guns get more costly to build for players, i.e. costing more supplies. However, by the late war, the NVA also fielded the 9K32 Strela 2, a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile which fired heat-seeking missiles. These Soviet-made man-portable shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles were designated as the SA-7 Grail by NATO. The first recorded use of this weapon in Vietnam was in 1972, so I'd hope we only see these on late war maps. These anti-aircraft weapons will add a new tactical layer. The Dishka or other heavy machine guns might serve as deployable heavy MGs for squads, doubling as anti-infantry fire support, while larger weapons like the ZPU AA guns could appear as commander-deployed assets or fixed emplacements near strongholds, while the Strela 2 missile launcher could be a powerful late-war tool for NVA players. These weapons, if used properly, will make US air power think twice about YOLOing into a hot LZ. In Hell Let Loose, my favourite role to play is anti-tank, but I think in Hell Let Loose Vietnam it's going to be anti-air. One of the new weapon systems confirmed for Hell Let Loose Vietnam are mortar squads. The NVA used a variety of these, such as the Type 31 60mm mortar, which is a Chinese copy of the US M2 mortar. This was in service in Vietnam from the 1950s, but they also used the Soviet 82mm PM41 mortar, which had been in use since the First Indochina War against the French. The Type 31 and the PM41 were man-portable, but the heavier Soviet 120mm M1938 mortar, which had been in use in Vietnam by the mid-1950s, would probably be a fixed deployable in the game because of its size. these are the likely mortars to be used in the game. But we still don't know how mortars will work in Hell Let Loose Vietnam. Will they use munitions like artillery does in the current Hell Let Loose game, or will they require supplies being placed nearby for support players or a supply truck? Who knows, we'll have to wait and see. Finally, let's take a quick look at sidearms and melee weapons the NVA are likely to get in the game. For pistols, we'll probably see squad leaders and commanders have loadouts with the Soviet Tokarev TT-33 pistol or its Chinese copy, the Type 54, as well as the Makarov PM pistol, which began appearing in NVA hands by 1962. Turning to melee weapons, apart from the bayonets which came with weapons like the AK-47s, AKMs, SKS or the Moisens, they also sometimes used machetes or bolo knives, which were handy in dense jungle environments as well as hand-to-hand combat. They also carried entrenching tools, so these might also be used as melee weapons in the game. From the French bolt-action rifles to the Chinese assault rifles, from Soviet RPGs to locally made booby traps, from heavy machine guns to surface air missiles, the North Vietnamese army in Hell Let Loose could be one of the most diverse factions in the game. I'm really looking forward to seeing how devs balance the asymmetrical character of the fighting in Vietnam, which took place during the war. Have I missed any weapons out? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know which NVA weapons you are most looking forward to in Hell Let Loose Vietnam. And don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more Hell Let Loose news and gameplay. I'll see you on the battlefield.